Hello, it's Saturday, May 27th, 2017. Joe Smoke Thoughts, Joe Smoke Provoke Thoughts, Project Uplift Literacy, where our black history need not ever be a black mystery. Today I'm going to do a lesson on the Congressional Medal of Honor, and I'm going to interact with that message, the heroic activity of Dorie Miller from December 7th, 1941, because today, 76 years ago, Dorie Miller received a medal from the Navy for his acts on December the 7th, and I'll be talking about that later. But I wanted to give some history first, because we need to know our history. Did you know that during World War I and World War II, not a single Medal of Honor winner was black? The reason was simple. Blacks had no rights that white people had to either acknowledge or respect. The country's separate doctrine of separate and inherently absolutely unequal was in full effect across the country. It did not end in the military until 1948. It was in all facets of the military. And as I said, today, on May 27th, 1941, 76 years ago, a man whose incredible efforts on December 7th, 1941 got recognition, but he didn't receive the Congressional Medal of Honor, and he still hasn't. The Navy has not yet awarded a Congressional Medal of Honor during wartime to a single black person. It was not until World War I that the color of a man's skin came to be a serious barrier to the Medal of Honor consideration. There was no written policy specifying discrimination. All branches of the military were well in step with the Jim Crow conditions of racism and would continue to be so until the Korean War over 30 years later. As a result, no African Americans were awarded a Medal of Honors during either World War I or World War II, and only a few were considered for the award. Despite the important strides made during the Vietnam War, the Army and Navy has yet to reckon with the obvious inequities that occurred during the world wars. Sadly, the Navy, which nominated no black sailor for the Medal of Honor in the years 1941 through 1945, has never made any attempt to correct the discrimination that took place during World War II. And no African American sailor has earned the Medal of Honor since Robert Penn did so in 1898. This is, however, not the case with the Army in the 1990s. In response to pressure from historians and the general public, the U.S. Army embarked on a series of studies looking into the conferment of past awards. In 1991, after his case was reopened and it was learned that his original recommendation for the award may have been replaced, Freddie Sowers became the only black World War I Medal of Honor recipient. In 1992, the Army commissioned an independent study conducted by Shaw University, the oldest historically black college in the South, to examine its Army records. After 4 years of continuous research, the study concluded that 10 men, all but one of whom have been awarded Distinguished Service Crosses, the highest decoration for Army personnel, but not across all armed force branches, were possible candidates for an upgrade to the Medal of Honor. The Army subsequently examined or re-examined these recommendations and reduced the number of award upgrades to 7, thereby helping to rectify, at least in part, the discrimination on the paths on their past, on their Army's past, racism and prejudice. Those that were chosen to receive the Medal of Honor included Officers Vernon Baker and John Fox, both of the 92nd Division, as well as Sergeant Carter, Jr. Of all the recipients, however, Vernon Baker was the only one still alive to receive his medal. That medal, that Congressional Medal of Honor, was presented to Vernon by President Bill Clinton at a special White House ceremony on the 14th of January, 1997. Doris Dorie Miller. Doris Dorie Miller received the Navy Cross on May 27, 1941. The Navy Cross at the time is the third highest military award. As I said, 446 Congressional Medal of Honors were given out between 12/6/41 to 8/6/45. Not one black earned a Congressional Medal of Honor during the initial periods of either World War I and World War II. And as I said earlier, only 7 Congressional Medal of Honors was given, and they were given by President Clinton in 1996-97. And only one of the award winners was still alive, and that's Vernon Baker. Doris Dorie Miller should have received the Congressional Medal of Honor for his heroics at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. But at the time, all of America's military was segregated by race, and within that segregation, blacks were relegated to the most menial of duties. Except for a few cases, combat units were entirely white, although there were a limited number of units of combat-ready black soldiers. In addition, the historic Tuskegee Air Corps provided air defense for our American pilots during their European bomber runs. General George Patton actually had under his command an all-black infantry tank unit called the Black Panthers. Let's get back to this morning's spotlight on this day, 76 years ago, when Admiral Nimitz awarded the Navy Cross to Dorie Miller for his heroic actions on December 7th, 1941. America at the time had a strict adherence for racial bigotry as well as racial separation in almost every facet of life. In the military, every branch of the military was segregated. Most blacks were limited to the most menial tasks while performing their patriotic duties. Doris Dorie Miller was a messman assigned to kitchen duties. It was even so bad that messmen were denied the right to wear the traditional anchor on their uniforms. And when Dorie Miller received his Navy Cross, his uniform did not have the traditional anchor on it as other sailors would have had. Assigned to the U.S. West Virginia, Dorie Miller was extremely courageous during the Pearl Harbor attack on the 7th of December. He served in the military, as I said, as most African Americans did, filling service jobs such as cooks. The Navy History and Heritage Command tells us a little bit more about Doris Dorie Miller, 3rd class cook, U.S. Navy. Born 1919, died 1943. Doris Dorie Miller was born in Waco, Texas on the 12th of October in 1919. He enlisted in the Navy in September 1939 as a mess attendant, 3rd class. On the 7th of December 1941, while serving aboard the U.S. West Virginia, Dorie distinguished himself by courageous conduct and a devotion to duty during the tragic Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Dorie Miller was awarded the Navy Cross for his actions on this occasion. Dorie Miller also served aboard the USS Indianapolis from December 1941 to May 1943. He was assigned to the escort carrier Lipscomb Bay. Cook, third class Dorie Miller, was lost with that ship when she was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine on the 24th of November 1943 during the invasion of the Gilbert Islands. On December 7th, 1943, his family, the family of Dorie Miller, was notified that he was missing in action. His normal job on the West Virginia was serving as a mess man, but he did not give his normal job responsibilities a second thought on the morning of December 7th. Leading the Japanese torpedo raid, Lieutenant Moriata's target was the West Virginia Dorie's ship. Although a dud bomb was later found on board, Morita scored a direct hit on the West Virginia, with Captain Binion mortally wounded and the ship burning. Dorie Miller did what so many men did that morning. They totally disregarded their own safety. Dorie disregarded his own safety. Dorie initially helped the captain and then manned one of the ship's machine guns until he was ordered off the bridge. You see, the West Virginia was sinking. Dorie Miller could do no more. But the country did something for Dorie. He was awarded the Navy Cross for valor above and beyond the call of duty. On this day, May 27, 1942, actually, he received the award. So he received his award in 1942, not 1941. Of course, he couldn't receive it in 1941 because it had already happened. December 27, 1942 was when he received his award. On December 7, 1941, during a Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Mess Attendant Dorie Miller came to the aid of his shipmates on the USS West Virginia, helping to move the injured out of harm's way, including the mortally wounded captain. Although untrained in its use, Dorie Miller also manned an anti-aircraft machine gun, downing several Japanese planes before being ordered to abandon the sinking ship. Dorie Miller's courage and devotion to duty at Pearl Harbor earned him the Navy Cross, the first ever awarded to an African-American sailor. The honor is even greater in light of the fact that African Americans were not allowed to serve in the were only allowed to serve in the messman's branch of the Navy at the time. Although later killed in 1943, Dorie Miller's legacy of bravery in the face of grave danger and great danger in his facing discrimination head-on still lives today as I honor him. Admiral Nimitz pinned the Navy Cross on Dorie Miller. In the citation that he gave Dorie for his heroism reads as follows: "For distinguished devotion to duty, extraordinary courage and disregard for his own personal safety during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor, territory of Hawaii, by Japanese forces on December 7, 1941, while on the side of his captain on the bridge, Miller, despite enemy strafing and bombing and in the face of serious fire, assisted in moving his captain, who had been mortally wounded, to a place of greater safety, then later manned and operated a machine gun directed at the enemy Japanese attacking aircraft until he was ordered to leave the bridge." I'm saying again that Dorie did not receive the Medal of Honor for his heroism. No African American, no matter how brave his action, would have received the Medal of Honor during World War I or World War II. It was later, as I said, in 1997 that President Clinton bestowed the nation's highest military honor on 7 African American World War II veterans, only one of which, Vernon Baker, was still alive to receive it. Recently, the West Virginia has once again made news because as they interpreted old evidence from historians and scientists, they believe that the West Virginia also suffered more than Mariotta's strike. Japanese two-man mini submarines were in the harbor. Experts using today's technology to examine a photo taken by a Japanese pilot believe that one of those midget subs is just barely visible above water. Some in the torpedo wake in the picture may have caused damage, may have been caused by midget subs, and it is believed at least one of her torpedoes struck the West Virginia. It is also believed that a mini sub was the first Pearl Harbor casualty. This article was written in Ebony magazine about Dorie Miller, and I'm going to read it now, part of Project Uplift Literacy. Dorie Miller didn't think about heroism on December 7, 1941, when he grabbed his anti-aircraft gun aboard the USS West Virginia and fired at a Japanese fighter planes attacking Pearl Harbor. Because he died in combat 2 years later, he never knew how grateful the country would be for his valor. Dorie Miller has been among the most celebrated black heroes of World War II. Dorie Miller's image was used to recruit African Americans in the war effort. He is also remembered on a U.S. postal stamp. He was portrayed by Cuba Gooding Jr. in the film Pearl Harbor, and his story is told in several museums, including the new Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. Still, though many feel he should have it, he should have received the Congressional Medal of Honor posthumously. If that will change, it's because Representative Eddie Bernice Johnson has in her sights that particular goal. Johnson, a Texas Democrat who grew up in the same Waco, Texas neighborhood that Miller was from, has been fighting to get recognition for Dorie Miller for several decades. Although it's an uphill battle, she's determined to win. I have lobbied the Department of Navy about as much as I know how to lobby them, Johnson told Dallas Morning News. I've been working on it ever since I've been in Washington. I don't know that I am any closer. When Bernice was just 7 years old, she went door to door in Waco asking for donations with her father so that they could honor Dorie Miller. Johnson recalls seeing him doing a stateside tour before he reported back to duty at Puget Sound Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. In the state of Washington. I remember him coming home after Pearl Harbor, Johnson said. He was a real hero. He continues to be a real hero. Miller was barred from serving in combat because of the then segregated military, and he served as a mess attendant. Third class aboard the USS West Virginia, stationed at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, when Japanese torpedoes struck the ship. He assisted in moving the ship's captain before loading an anti-aircraft machine gun and firing against airborne attackers. He then continued to assist in saving the lives of crew members throughout the duration of the attack. In 1942, he was awarded the Navy Distinguished Service Cross for his bravery. Two senators, Senator James Meade and Representative John Dingell Sr., both introduced bills to award Miller the Medal of Honor, but they never passed. Then Secretary of Navy Frank Cox wrote a commendation for Miller, but also recommended against giving him the Medal of Honor. After duty at Puget Sound, he reported to the USS Lipscomb Bay. The ship and its crew fought in the Battle of Market Islands in the South Pacific and took a direct torpedo hit, sinking it. Dorie Miller was one of the 700 crewmen who died in the battle. Fast forward 7 decades, and Johnson is still determined as she was when she was that 7-year-old little girl to see that Dorie Miller gets the proper recommendation. Navy rules state that for a serviceman to get the medal more than 3 years after the act of bravery, special recommendation from the Secretary of Navy to reopen the case. But so far there has been no decision on it from the current Secretary, Ray Mabus. In 2015, the Navy said that racial discrimination had played no part in Miller being denied the medal, according to a study. The 1988-1989 study concluded that there was no evidence of racial discrimination in the Miller case, and the heroic acts of Petty Officer Doris Miller did not rise above the line between the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. In 1996, a second study came to the same conclusion. Navy spokesman Lieutenant David Bennett told the Dallas Morning News at the time. But Johnson, now in her 13th term in office, balked at that notion. I disagree, along with about 1 million other people we've heard from, she said. Dorie Miller may not be any closer to receiving that Medal of Honor, but the groundswell effort to get him the award continues to grow. William Guzman, an assistant professor at history and African American studies at Florida A&M University, also has been an ardent campaigner to get the award for Miller and believes Navy studies have not considered what he had to overcome to perform his acts of bravery. He wasn't even allowed to have access to weaponry because the Navy sincerely believed at the time that African Americans were intellectually inferior, that they were cowards, Guzman told the Morning News. And when you consider that he was still able to save some of his fellow comrades from death, that speaks volumes. So today I provide a little lesson on military history, and I say a wonderful, appreciative word for Doris Dorie Miller, for his heroism on December 7th, 1941. And I remember his receiving the Navy Cross on this day, May 27th, 1942.
I found something on the web about history and a wonderful appreciated word for Doris.
I want you all to have a great day, and this has been Project Uplift Literacy. This has been Joe Smoke Thoughts, www.joesmokethoughts.com. I continue to express the need for us to continue to read and learn about our history. Too many of our brothers and sisters, and more brothers and sisters, quite naturally, are illiterate and unable to read. 46% of Black Americans have some issue with illiteracy in this country. And 61% of our 9-year-olds are reading below basic levels. So we need to do better, much better in reading. Have a great Saturday. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. God bless you all.